as our first speaker, Gary Hirshberg, told me ahead of this event, things have changed from when he was helping to pioneer the idea that organic and natural products could have a hand on the tiller in the food system. This is how much they've changed. There's actually money there now. And that wasn't there when he was legendarily digging in the mud at his farm, working as his own electrician, and generally shocking this industry to life. Money in the food and beverage business is like blood. You need it to survive, and the predators can smell it running through your balance sheets. As that money comes into the sector, things do indeed change. The focus and the magnetism and the romance of it change, but some things still need to stay the same. Gary, the founder and chief organic optimist of Stonyfield Farm, will be speaking from a place of hard-earned lessons he's observed on the ways that as you grow, you can plan, shape, and execute the deals that can keep your hand on the tiller and maybe help you as you try to change the world. Please welcome Gary Hirshberg.
Well, thanks, Jeff, and thanks to all of you. I was actually glad for that introduction because I was trying to figure out why a food guy was invited here, but the fermenting community is I realize that's my in. I actually spoke yesterday at the close of Nosh, and I have to say, someone someday is going to have to explain to me why Nosh is 2/3 women and BevNet's 2/3 men, but I digress. Look, I'm not really a beverage guy, although I was on the founding board of Honest Tea for many years and involved with Forager. And, of course, we have our tens of millions of dollars smoothie line. And I've had the privilege of being buddies and friends. Well, I'm on the board of Orgain and wonderful little brands like Bhakti Chai here and many others. But I am happy to try to impart some wisdom to you all, although I do want to be clear that I'm sort of from the school of where the Churchill quote of wisdom is something you get just after you needed it sort of holds true. Stonyfield has, as Jeff explains, at the early going, we really had a wonderful company, but just no supply and no demand. I mean, there was certainly no money, but consumers didn't even understand what organic means. And I think it goes without saying, and as I see my friends like Jim Fultz and Bob Burke and others here who've been at this for a long time, I think we'd all agree it is by far the most competitive and dynamic market it's ever been, certainly in my 36+ years. There's more players, there's more money, there's more talent, including what I call a lot of large company refugees who've kind of come over to the health and wellness space. And there's also, as a result, more pressure on growth, especially because of the crazy valuation multiples that we see time and time again. Most of the strategics, and I've been involved with a ton of these deals, are by definition overpaying. It's just so competitive. And so the ROIs, the pressure on ROIs is crazy. There's also more messaging, more verbiage, more words, more buzzwords and more claims out there. And so, of course, what this means is there's less room for error. There's less shelf space relative to demand. There's less time to prove yourself. When Bob was my sales VP back in the early 80s, we would have a year to prove ourselves on the shelf. I think most of you would kill to have a year. What is it now? A month or two, depending on the retailer. So, in trying to keep up with the current market trends, I convened last fall a group of 18 of the leading organic brands in the country in Chicago for a couple of days to really do a deep dive into consumer insights to try to figure out, how to cut through the noise and the clutter, because there's enormous amounts of confusion out there. In fact, I'll get to that in a moment. One of the key insights you get from survey after survey. And as we pooled our data, we came to realize over our couple days that there are some clues about how to compete in this newer environment, which I just thought it might be useful for me to share with you. And I think that can help guide the sort of attentive brand leader for how to navigate. So just to ground this, so we level set, Stonyfield sells to roughly 6 million users, more or less, mostly women, of course. Small subset, though, of the roughly 40 million who identify themselves as wellness-minded. So still big upside out there, even though we're obviously a mature, nearly $400 million company. But when you look at this larger audience and you pool insights, as our group did, and then subsequently Stonyfield has engaged some deeper research, you'll see that there's lots of interest and a lot of knowledge and experience when it comes to parenting, when it comes to environmentally friendly products, shopping, snacks, education, products for children and babies. There's a high level of education, far higher than at any time in my career. But you also see 4 very clear and powerful insights. And I'm actually amazed to say that I saw these come up across every single company who brought their insights to our gathering. The first is, I alluded to this a moment ago, abject confusion. The overwhelming amount of claims and verbiage out there. Consumers really don't understand the difference between organic, non-GMO, fair trade, local, humane, regenerative is now out there. And this confusion is both a curse and a blessing because it's an opportunity for brands to come up, particularly those who can be clearer and simpler in our communications. And in a moment, I'm going to suggest a way we do this, and I'm going to tell you right now, it's not with words. It's much more about actions, and actions truly speak louder than words. But let me give you the other insights, then we'll come to that. There's severe distrust of claims that would follow from all the confusion. There's severe distrust of institutions, of our government, of large corporations, because again, we're saying all of this stuff, but the talk-do ratio is often way out of whack. And so there's a corollary desire for a relationship with the brands that they support. And this comes up time and again, particularly among millennials and particularly among millennial moms, which is, parents, which is about half of all millennials. They really require radical transparency, consistency, honesty as never before. And if you can get that, then you can have them. And then you get far less brand switching. Third insight, the internet is the most trusted source now for this emerging consumer. That internet didn't even exist in my day. So we were in an entirely different world. We used to do these, communicate with consumers with these things called letters. You may have heard of them. You put a little stamp in the corner. It's an antiquated device. But anyways, and then the fourth one, and I think the most important one for you all, she is so busy she can't finish anything she needs to do in a day. This comes up 100% of the time, that moms in particular, but young parents go to sleep frustrated because with all the pressures on life, they're carrying obviously more debt into their adulthood. They've got young kids. They've got careers that are pressurized. People just can't get stuff done. And probably part of it is that they're spending 5-6 hours a day looking at devices, right? So that sort of tends to, this so-called time and labor saver eats up. But juggling family and work demands is incredible. So if you can make her, and I'm talking about her because it's my primary consumer, life easier, this is obviously, in all respects, clear, less confusing rhetoric or less rhetoric, cleaner labels. Look at Siggi's. I think one of the reasons Siggi's is the fastest growing yogurt in the country is clean, absolutely clean, simple label, 5 ingredients. It's like no bullshit and no confusion, right? It's not organic, by the way, but it just states very clearly what is, and more importantly, what isn't there. If you can be more convenient, the fastest growing sector for us is pouches, tubes, one-handed eating, drinks. How many times do you, for those of you who commute to work, see people on the run eating? I had 3 little yogurt eaters in our lives, and getting those kids to eat. I mean, one of them mastered the art of waking up 8 minutes before the first bell at school, and to get any kind of nutrition into this kid meant that I had to be up an hour before him making the smoothies, getting it into a transportable cup and pouring it down. But I drive back and forth in New Hampshire on my ride. I've never seen so many people eating. Of course, they're also doing this, and they're on their phones, and it's terrifying out there on the highways. But the eating thing is hot. One-handed eating and consumption is obviously here to stay, and that's a part of it. If you can make it easy by making it viscerally obvious what your attributes are, that yours are really the best choices for her and her family, then you really have a shot at becoming her BFB, her best friend brand. And again, the data clearly shows that once you're there, it's very hard to pry that brand out of their hands. They're going to stay loyal. And the good news is that since she trusts the internet, we, emerging brands, newer, less well-financed brands, have a chance by cultivating third-party influencers. Stonyfield's primary communication these days is bloggers. We bring our bloggers to farms. We take them out for 2 days and 3 days. It's where we're putting most of our money, honestly. Why? Print media, I'm sorry if I offend any advertisers here, but it just doesn't work. Millennials aren't even reading that stuff, and certainly they're clicking past it if it's on electronic media. So having a third-party influencer, a validator, somebody who they trust, a mom, and you get these killer, mom bloggers who will have 2.5, 3 million followers out there. Podcasts. I don't know if you've heard this, How I Built This podcast. Guy Raz did one on Stonyfield. We've had 2 million downloads of this thing, more than I ever had in 40 years of other kinds of media. And so you've got other vehicles available to you, and particularly through third-party validators, real opportunity. But I also want to stress very quickly, and you can take this from me for sure, you can't rely on this stuff. You have to constantly replenish the well, right? Constantly, radical honesty and transparency is not something you can do and then rest on. You've got to constantly keep it real. Stonyfield had a 22% compounded annual growth rate for 19 straight years, right up until about 2011. As we rode up from the tens of millions up to, as I say, almost 400. We had the right products, we had the right communications, we had the right level of activism, touching people in other ways, lots of sampling, obviously, with all that activism. We had the right support for our employees, our suppliers. We had farmers wandering around with webcams on the farm. Half the time I was worried they weren't even milking because they were so busy being rock stars, talking about the weather and watching cows chew cud. Really exciting, but you can't believe the number of downloads that people would have just from their wherever office in New York City, watching cows just kind of stand there chewing. But it was happening, and we did a What's in Your Cup series where we visited our sugar operations, our fruit operations, and had the farmers talk. We got out of the way. And again, today we bring bloggers doing that. But since then, a combination of forces really acted to kind of impair the company's growth for a stretch. The competition got a lot better at mimicking the claims without paying the dues. We had a lot of organic seeming brands out there who would put a barn on their label or a farmer and imply organic, but without paying the freight and of course without having the price pressure. And some of these brands out there, they would use slogans that suggested absolute clarity, even though all their grain and feed was GMO and so on. But we've gotten better at sort of bullshitting, and this actually took a toll. We had a case where, and I think in our discussion with Jeff, we'll probably talk about this a little bit. I'll just allude to it now. We had a corporate parent who acquired us in 2001, Danone, who really was under profit pressure and therefore put profit pressure on Stonyfield. And so after 19 years of this double-digit growth, we became a profit source. We had matured, and that profits were needed to fund other things. And in my opinion, as an entrepreneur, not enough of that was going back into the company, into innovation, renovation. As I say, you can't rely on where you've been. It's what have you done for me today? And there was even some impairment of the voice and mission as I drifted away out into more activism, chairing the Just Label It campaign to get federal labeling of GMOs and other activist exercises. More and more lawyers got involved. As a public company with a public company ownership, this is, of course, an inevitable result, and that started to sort of lessen our edge and lessen the kinds of things that we were saying to build that. But things have absolutely turned around in the last year. As you may know, the company, through the Department of Justice, forced Danone, when Danone was acquiring WhiteWave, they forced, this is a little bit of irony, Danone was acquiring WhiteWave, which of course owns Horizon, and so the DOJ didn't want several $100 million organic milk brands pooled under one roof, which was probably legitimate. But funny enough, a month after Danone, after we announced our intention to buy WhiteWave, Bayer announced its intention to buy Monsanto. You may have noticed that just went through. Yeah. So a $69 billion acquisition. You can say goodbye to the name Monsanto. It's a contaminated name, obviously, with good reason. And so it's out. But, it's kind of weird that multi-billion-dollar chemical seed companies can combine in a couple $100 million in organic camp, but that's another political discussion, isn't it? But we have sort of hit our stride again. Under a private company, frankly, it's been a lot easier and a lot more freedom to have our voice back. This is what brought me back into this new role of COO, Chief Organic Optimist, as you heard. Pouches have we've doubled down on pouches. We've dramatically reduced sugar across the lines, absolute necessity right now. We've actually improved the nutrition of most of our products and the taste. Tripling down on the blogger outreach. Since I've come back, we're now doing 4 of these blogger tours a year, and not cheap. I mean, we're really spending to curate a visit, partnering with other brands, by the way, to go out and visit farms. But again, this is a matter of enabling influencers. We've launched a bunch of campaigns. One that you'll see in partnership with the Environmental Working Group being announced this week. If you were at Expo West, you saw we gave out about 20,000 hats with it said, Make Earth Cool Again. A little play, obviously, but we're focused on the midterms. There's a hashtag on the back of all of our hats, sending people to a website where you can get the environmental voting records on toxins and on climate of people running for Congress. We've got to get the dismantling of the EPA, which is really what's happening right now, is exactly the wrong thing for this world, and it's exactly the wrong thing from millennials' perspective. And so we are just urging people, whatever your party, whatever your partisan leanings, libertarian, Republican, Democrat, that look, if you are happy with the dismantling of the EPA, then fine, keep things the way they are. But if you're not, we need a Congress that's going to stand up and focus on restraining this deregulation. And we've launched a double-down effort. I mentioned the GMO labeling. The rules are now out for comment till July 3rd. If you want to get your brand connected to your millennial, go to justlabelIt.org and get your consumers to send in comments on these rules. It's a public comment period till July 3rd. The rules that have been issued, you might imagine, under this administration are not exactly wildly transparent. In fact, there's a strong potential that 70% of foods with GMOs might not have to be labeled, might be exempted. So we've got a serious situation now, and again, we're doubling down in a way. We have 400,000 or 500,000 consumers now who we're urging to get comments in, and they need to get in. And this is, I invite you, because this is a way that your brand can, again, it's the action more than the talk. And finally, I'll just quickly mention one project that I'm really excited about. It's our 35th birthday. Turns out that 91%, it's 21 million children playing on playing fields every day, parks, schoolyards, etc. 91% of which are treated to at least an annual cocktail of herbicides, most of which act as neurotoxins. Dicamba, glyphosate. I just want you to know I'm not the most depressing guy in the world, but we have to face this stuff. 2,4-D, which impacts brain development, autism. We now have 1 in 55 kids, boys being diagnosed as autistic, and inadvertent exposure to these toxins is seen as the primary cause. And so we've set out to adopt 35 communities in celebration of our 35th year, following the lead of some incredibly progressive and brilliant moms out in Irvine, California, who converted all the town's fields into organic production. One of them even became the mayor of the town, and another group called Beyond Pesticides. Working with these two NGOs, we're adopting 35 communities around the country to help them to turn their fields organic. By the way, just a parenthetical, saves the town's money. By year 3, it's actually taxpayer benefit. There's less cost as you improve the soil. Basically bringing exactly what we've done in agriculture, but bringing it again to this place where kids play each and every day. 69% of consumers who eat organic say they do so to avoid pesticides, but 66% say they've never even thought of the fields where their kids play. And if a kid rolls around on the grass, the biggest organ on their body, and picks up glyphosate or 2,4-D or one of these herbicides, it goes straight to the bloodstream. And of course, young kids, this is where most of the impacts are. So what am I telling you here? And I'll just wrap up with this. I'm telling you that our actions count more than our words. I'm telling you that this is a campaign where we are not selling people anything. Obviously, we're hoping they'll feel good about us. Obviously, we're hoping they'll make the connection between what's going on in the fields and what's going on in our body. But honestly, it doesn't matter how much organic food you eat if your child's getting exposed to these toxins. So I'll just wrap and summarize, because I know Jeff wants to have a few discussion points here with this. Let me just say, the history of consumer products, it has always been about somebody taking at the expense of somebody else. Usually it's about making products as cheap as possible so you have as big a gross margin as possible to buy as much advertising and promotion as possible. And what that tends to mean, cheapness means cheating farmers, shortcutting environment, health. Cheap food is not, right? If it's cheap at the cash register, it may not be cheap in the long run. You're paying a price somewhere on the environment or our health. And this paradigm of using the gross margin to buy as much A&P as you possibly could, it's over. A&P just isn't working as a purchase influence. Every survey shows that. What I'm suggesting to you, and I'll again close with this, is that there's a new path available to those of us who have real missions, real commitments to real ingredients and real supply chains and real health, and being a real friend of a mom or a dad who really needs it, or any of us. You can jump all the way. The old paradigm was trial, repeat trial, purchase, repeat purchase, and eventually at the end, the holy grail, loyalty. You can jump right to loyalty by bonding and connecting if you're touching the consumer in some way that is really meaningful without getting on that flywheel. So I would simply say money is not the key, though, as we'll probably discuss in a moment, there's certainly plenty of it out there, but because it can never replace a deep commitment to mission. And that's true now more than ever. And honestly, the best way to predict and take control of your future is truly to invent it. So I hope that these lessons have some relevance to you in this incredibly competitive world. I truly, as I've come back into Stonyfield, know no other way to compete with the absolute proliferation of products than to get back to those very roots that caused our ramp up in the first place. So I hope that was useful. Thank you.
Wow.
Okay.
Great. Yes. So I invite your questions. Here, have a seat here. I know you were there yesterday, but
Yeah.
see, you get
Home.
close to me now. So you mentioned the path. How do we fund the path, and how do we ensure that the funding for that path stays in alignment with where we want to go?
Yeah. Well, it's very interesting to see. Last week I was at the Secretary of Agriculture's office with 4 of the largest CPGs in America, essentially protesting these new rules, that they're not strong enough. And those were not the bedfellows I would have had 5 years ago.
Yeah, how'd that go?
Well, it was great to be with them. I'm not sure how well we were heard, but there's another 4 or 5 coming in this coming week. You could ask, why are these large strategics there? Because they don't want to be put between their consumer and what the consumer wants. And that's exactly what's happened. And so Jeff knows this, I'll just tell you all. I was on the board of Honest Tea when we sold the Coke, Annie's, General Mills, Applegate, Hormel, Stonyfield, obviously, we've sold it twice, Late July. and I've lost track a couple of others. And so, I'm all for taking advantage of the scale and the depth and the balance sheet of large strategics, but only when the strategic is there to learn as well. With this overpay, they're in a crisis, most of them. How to get an ROI? And I would suggest that the enlightened ones, and you've seen Campbell's do some very creative things, and Kellogg's and Mills and Danone and Lactalis now. We have to take them by the hand and help them to understand that we can be efficient with our dollars, but we have to communicate in more authentic ways.
But we're working really hard as entrepreneurs. It's so tempting to take a more burdensome payoff as the result of that hard work.
Yeah, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work because if you're just selling on features and benefits or on advertising communications, the data shows it doesn't work. Loyalty is an emotional reflex. It's not an intellectual one. You have to touch people to get loyalty. And what's the value of loyalty? The holy grail is word of mouth, right? You're much more likely to be influenced by a friend telling you you've got to drink this stuff, you've got to have this bhakti chai, right? Than an advertisement. And so the old adage that fund and fuel, pump those gross margins out there, it's not a good ROI equation anymore. I mean, can you ride it up fast? Sure, you can, but can you sustain it? That's the question. And I would submit that mission and therefore getting enlightened leadership on the part of either the private equity or the investors or the acquirers is absolutely critical to that. It was interesting. Lactalis called me the morning after they bought Stonyfield. And I had been sort of drifted into the background. I was focused on the GMO stuff, and we have a consortium of organic companies helping to grow the organic messaging. And they said, look, we need you to come back and do that stuff you do. They didn't know what it was.
Well, it sounds like there was mission drift.
Yeah. Yeah, there was.
And I don't know if it was mission drift at Stonyfield or mission drift at Danone.
I think there was panic because, again, global pressures on profits. Also concern about making claims. It's one thing when you have the organic lunatic, who wasn't exhaling back in the 60s, speaking. It's another when you try to educate somebody about these, they follow scripts, right? And the consumer can see through a script. If you're not speaking from the heart with passion, with emotion, if you're not seeing it on your face or in your actions, which is again my point, then it's not legitimate. It's not credible. So I'm challenging the notion that it takes a lot of money. The farmer camera that we had, honestly, it got more downloads than almost anything we did. It cost $75 to give this farmer the camera, and believe me, he loved being a rock star and was out there. The blogger tours, yeah, they cost $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a pop for 2 days, but compared to buying purchased advertising, it's a rounding error.
Let's talk about the dairy case for a sec, because there's a lot of almost activism, innovation, agricultural change sort of happening in this petri dish in the store. Why is so much happening there?
Well, first of all, one of the great, I mentioned I'm on the board of Forager. I mean, the emergence of plant-based alternatives now is certainly one of the mega trends. I would say direct-to-consumer and plant-based are two of, if you're not paying attention to both, then you're missing something happening. These products are better tasting than ever before. They deliver more and better benefits. And if you're not paying attention, they're eating huge shelf space. I was at Whole Foods headquarters store in Austin last week. There's an entire door now of plant-based yogurts that weren't there. So we're, on the dairy side, we're fighting for less space. There's also more knowledge now. Organically fed cows live twice as long. Consumers want it all, right? This consumer wants everything. She wants to know how it's grown, who's growing it. The fact that organic cows live twice as long is a meaningful thing. They want humane treatment. They want to know that the farmers are being well cared for. This sort of win-win-win system plays. So I think there's a lot of scrutiny. There's also obviously a lot of concern about animals in food in general.
In terms of surviving as a brand in the dairy case, and that sort of applies to any incredibly competitive set.
Yeah.
What are the principles you got to hold to?
Less ingredients is more. Every single ingredient needs to be scrutinized. Do you really absolutely need it? Even though your R&D person will say, yeah, this is necessary for this or that, test that with the consumer. Because I would submit that that benefit may be offset if it's something unpronounceable or long, or if it's too long. One of the powerful things we did with Stonyfield in the early day, Bob was with me, was we did an ad called Read 'em and Weep, and we would just have the back of all the cups. We'd show the ingredients panels. And there were the panels like this, and there was ours like this.
Innovation cycles speeding up, though. How do you balance that?
Brutal. I mean, that is the problem, is your time now for proof is short. This is where online, of course, plays. You get an opportunity to build trial, to build consumption, to build buzz, without necessarily being subject to the retailer's short timetables.
What do you see in this new generation of entrepreneurs that they're bringing to the table that maybe hasn't been there in the past?
They're closer to the consumer than ever before. My son, some of you probably know, my son has launched a line of organic apple cider drinking vinegar shots called Ethan's, nationally distributed in Whole Foods, not because of his old gray dad, but because the product is just, he hit it at the right time. He's a millennial. He's 28 years old. He gets what his bros, his buddies, his friends are drinking and using, and they're using social media absolutely brilliantly with very few words. And I can't stress this enough. Like, forget the words. We're all so proud of this feature and this benefit, and we feel it's absolutely crucial. They know this and that. People cannot pay attention. They're overwhelmed. It's too much. So whether it's on the ingredient panel or front of the panel or in your advertising, less is more. I got to give a call out to Evian. Down the street, a couple blocks. It's a beautiful ad for an Evian bottle there. And it was basically just the picture. And I'm telling you, one of the problems as a father, I can tell you, kids are reading less, which is another issue. But images, actions, pictures, real pictures, reality, showing what you're actually doing, and toning down that verbiage is I think working. And that's because, again, this younger supplier is that same consumer.
So the subliterate leading the illiterate?
Okay, I'm not going there, but it is of concern.
Gary, thank you very much.
My pleasure, Jeff. Okay, thanks. Yeah.